Today on The Real Story, the impeachment trial of President Donald J. Trump. We're going to get reaction from Congressman Joe Courtney, a Democrat who represents Connecticut's 2nd District. What's his take on the process? Also, the new trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, and new efforts to lower the cost of prescription drugs, plus saving minor league baseball.
And a special session on tolls canceled, which means a vote would now happen during the regular session, which starts on Wednesday. The bill's details, though, are finally out. Are Republicans buying any of it? Senate Minority Leader Len Fasano is here to lay out what he believes are the problems, including his claim that Democrats are using bonding to buy votes.
It's all today on The Real Story. Hi there, you're watching The Real Story. I'm Al Terzi alongside Jen Bernstein.
Thank you, Al, and good morning to everyone at home. Well, the Senate impeachment trial, it's a process that we've only seen 3 times in history. The spotlight on the 100 senators essentially serving as the jury. Republicans and Democratic leaders in the chamber will ultimately decide whether President Donald Trump remains in office.
A distinguished member of Connecticut's delegation to Congress, 2nd District Congressman Joe Courtney, is joining us first here this morning with his take on the process. Well, you voted in the House in favor of the resolution to send the articles over to the Senate for trial. What's your take overall on the process? Has it been fair?
So, I think if you go back over the last 2 years, it's important to note that there were actually 3 votes in the floor of the House regarding impeachment before the last effort, which actually moved forward, which was rejected in those 3 prior occasions. And the last one actually was in July of 2019, a week before the infamous phone call between the president and the president of Ukraine. And I was on the side of voting to table those special motions, as frankly the rest of the Connecticut delegation was. But, there was roughly about 70 or 80 who voted in favor of moving forward, and whether it was the Mueller report or just other issues that people were upset about. But I think it's important to note that, which is that, the notion in this narrative that there was been a sort of concerted plan to go forward on impeachment. I mean, the fact is that in 3 prior votes, the House rejected those types of attempts. What changed here was that a whistleblower whose complaint was validated by a Trump appointee in the Inspector General's Office for Intelligence certified that it was credible, that it was urgent, and that it affected national security. And, the whistleblower law is designed to go directly to Congress to trigger an investigation. There was depositions of well over a dozen witnesses where the minority had absolute total opportunity to participate, and they did. Some of those depositions went on late into the evening because, lawyers on both sides were, like any deposition, were sort of going back and forth. And then there was the public witness events where, and the transcripts of the depositions were released, and then obviously, a number of witnesses were brought before the Intelligence Committee. In almost every instance, they were Trump appointees. And in my opinion, courageous people, because the president had ordered them not to go to these hearings. And nonetheless, people like Ambassador Taylor, decorated Vietnam War veteran, distinguished record in diplomacy, the ambassador to Ukraine, impeccable record, 30 years of serving this country under Republican administrations, Colonel Vindman. These were not deep state Democrats who, had an axe to grind.
Is there such a thing as a deep state?
I don't, look, there's people who, the federal government is massive, and you're going to have people of all political stripes. Sure. But the fact of the matter is, in this instance, the people who came forward were people who reported their concerns, through the channels, and it ended up in the whistleblower process before the Congress.
Was that the moment when you were hearing from these witnesses that you decided you would vote for impeachment because of the fact that they were Trump appointees?
So as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, we actually have had quite a bit of interaction with the Ukrainian military. The admiral who's the head of their naval forces actually was in my office because I'm chair of Sea Power, as you know. And they described, the Russian seizure of 3 Ukrainian ships in international waters in Thanksgiving of 2018, right around that week. And the fact is that, military assistance for Ukraine is something that we, on a bipartisan basis, approved over a number of years. We have treaty obligations with Ukraine from 1994 when they surrendered their nuclear weapons that we would help guarantee their territorial integrity, which obviously Russia has totally violated, seizing the Crimean Peninsula and, occupying half of eastern Ukraine. So the vote to pass military assistance was something that, wasn't just some feel-good bill that was symbolic. I mean, this was real because there's a conflict going on, 13,000 casualties, and the Department of Defense had vetted whether there was a risk of corruption. I mean, that was in the law, that they had to, determine whether or not there was a risk that these funds would be diverted improperly, certified that there was not. I mean, they really ran the traps. And then, that was in May of 2019, and then all of a sudden it just sort of disappeared from the radar screen, and people were like, what is going on here? And obviously, through the testimony that we heard, the president improperly diverted the funds. And I say that because the Government Accountability Office issued a report just about 3 weeks ago. I mean, they are the gold standard for tracking compliance with federal laws, and they determined that the president violated the Federal Impoundment Control Act, which was passed after Watergate, because Nixon was, withholding funds, and Congress said, you can't do that. You got to spend the money or provide some really public, transparent, legal explanation for why you're not. And we know now that, with the emails and everything else, they were told to just completely bury this thing for months.
The House charges, there's been a lot of criticism about them and whether they actually hold up. When you're looking at them, do you feel like they're strong enough?
So, I've heard the arguments by Professor Dershowitz, which basically said, and he said this, is that, if a president determines that, his own political interest is in the national interest, then he's permitted to do that. I mean, that is one of the wildest, most dangerous political theories. I mean, and that's really, I think, I realize how polarized everything is, and it's, maybe I'm just being, too idealistic or romantic here, but at some point we're establishing a precedent that future presidents are going to say, I don't have to tell you anything. I don't have to share my appointees to come up and testify. I don't have to supply documents. I mean, zero in terms of approving and that was not the case in Watergate. It was not the case in the Clinton experience. So, that's, if nothing else, trying to at least open a little bit, a crack in the door to get some of these questions answered with documents and witnesses. In some ways, just really, I think, protects the future. Because, let's face it, history's watching this.
And speaking of the future, how concerned are you about how a Trump acquittal, if in fact it's happened, has in fact happened as we sit here tonight on Thursday evening? But how does that impact going forward?
There's no question if you look at President Clinton that his numbers went up after the Senate did not convict, and I think frankly some of the hesitation in the Speaker Pelosi and others up until this Ukrainian thing came forward was about the fact that there could be a political boost in terms of doing it. But at some point, you've got to really just sort of set that aside. And I know some people sort of poo-poo whether that's really what's going on here. The notion that there was a political upside to this, that was the plan here. I mean, I think you have to be out of your mind to think that that's the case. When Peter Rodino was chairman of the House Judiciary Committee under Nixon, he ran the committee where they reported out the articles of impeachment. Very modest, low-key guy. He did a great job. After he got done, he went back to his office, closed the door, and wept. And frankly, a lot of people that night felt the same way, that no one wants this. It's a divisive event. And but at some point, you have to look at your heart and your mind about what your oath is and where your obligations really fundamentally rest.
I know you're friends, obviously, with Republicans on the other side of the aisle. You all have a camaraderie. What are you hearing from them in your off conversations?
So, I mean, again, one of the reasons why this is not something anyone should relish is just it is very awkward. And I am friends with a lot of folks, and particularly on armed services, where we work on a great bipartisan basis. At some point you compartmentalize sometimes in terms of just the way you interact with people. 22 House Republicans have already announced they're not running again. It's a big number. And I, frankly, I think that sort of speaks volumes about how the discomfort level, that they're living under is making them sort of head for the exits.
Speaking of discomfort, a lot of people are concerned about this growing threat from this coronavirus.
Yes.
Is the U.S. government ready to handle this?
So the Center for Disease Control came over and did a brief this week, and they are definitely on high alert. The international airports now are definitely screening for people coming through from obviously countries of concern, and just like they did with Ebola. And so that's happening. They just evacuated about 200 Americans out of Wuhan province, but they are in voluntary quarantine in a military facility.
In China?
No, in the U.S.
I mean,
from
Wuhan
province in China.
Right.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the numbers at this point has not risen to a point where I think they feel that they need to do more at this point. I would note we're in influenza season right now, and there's about 8,000 who've been 8,000 deaths nationwide, and about 23 or 24 in Connecticut. People should get their flu shots.
Are people skeptical of the numbers that are coming out of China?
Yes, and they should be. I mean, look, that's one of the problems with a country like that is that you have a president for life who does not follow norms in terms of freedom of press or democracy. Having said that, I mean, they did report there's been really actually pretty good communication with health officials over there.
One of the things that I know you're watching, you mentioned earlier your involvement in the Sea Power Committee. What's going on with this pier? I understand that's being threatened now, the money for the pier, the new sub pier in New London?
So, at the end of December, in addition to the impeachment vote on December 18th, we actually passed the full budget for 2020, and included in the budget is military construction funds, $73 million for the Groton sub base for a new pier. Again, they have the new Virginia-class subs that are the longer version because they have new payload in it, and this upgrade is modernizing to get the infrastructure down.
How critical is that you get this pier?
Very critical,
and sooner rather than later?
Absolutely, and again, it was vetted. This is not an earmark. This is not pork. Again, you have to go through an incredibly competitive process in the Department of Defense to get on the MILCON, as they call it, list, and we did, and so. Unfortunately, last year, the president reprogrammed money out of the Department of Defense into the Department of Homeland Security for wall construction. Again, this is so totally out of the norm. Reprogramming does happen sometimes, but it happens within the department. So in other words, if something's going on in Iraq, they will, but not from one department to another, and again with no consultation with the committee. So after we passed the budget, President signed it into law. There's $10 billion for MILCON. This is a $73 million project. The notice went out that they are going to reprogram again for the wall about $3.7 billion out of the 10. So. As I was mentioning to Al before, the sooner we can get that money obligated and under contract, the better. And the Navy's target is August of this year, before the end of the fiscal year. Frankly, that's the best strategy we can do to try and protect it. The priority, though, in terms of if you look at the pace of deployment of subs out of Groton, because frankly things are getting very busy in the North Atlantic and the high north, and we're the closest base to that. This is not an ornamental upgrade. This is like an operational need.
National security.
Yep.
Well,
all right. Congressman Joe Courtney, thank you so much for coming here and giving us an update.
Yep. All right,
appreciate you coming on.
Yep.
And on deck, we have Republican leader Len Fasano from the Connecticut Senate. We're expecting a vote this week soon about what he thinks. We're going to get what he thinks about the bill's details.
And coming right up after the Real Story, it's Real People with Stan Simpson. With the Super Bowl only a few hours away, Stan's going to sit down with two Connecticut natives who are familiar with the National Football League. One of them earned a Super Bowl ring in 2001. So stick around for that. But first, the Real Story will continue right after a quick break.
Calling all everyday heroes, the movers and shakers, those taking first steps, giant leaps, or onto the biggest adventure of all. Calling all forces of nature, the kind-hearted, the light-hearted, the purple-hearted, the ones who dig deep every day. We are Yukon Health, where together we are stronger than apart, because together, anything is possible.
A Wethersfield man is being called an American hero, even attracting the attention of Chelsea Clinton, and he's making a difference without even saying a word. This is Alan Dornan's daily ritual.
I walk with my sign all the way down Goff Road to Prospect Street, where the sidewalk ends just before Prospect Street.
The 78-year-old has been walking 2 miles around his neighborhood every day since January, despite scoliosis and severe stenosis.
It hurts me all the time I'm walking, but I'll tell you, it's worth it.
Dornan says it's part of a new life calling to help dreamers and immigrants.
There is a full-scale attack that is taking place to eliminate these immigrants from America.
His quiet neighborhood walks caught the eye of Chelsea Clinton, who recently tweeted her support of Dornan.
Chelsea Clinton tweeted about me. Little old me.
And that's propelling his message to a bigger platform where he's receiving hundreds of notes from immigrants expressing everything from gratitude.
Thank you so much for what you're doing for us.
To their deepest fears.
I'm terrified of taking my daughters to Mexico and to expose them to the violence happening there.
Dornan says his dedication to the cause stems from his own childhood as the son of immigrants, able to realize his dreams and hope for a better tomorrow. Today, he says, the narrative is darker.
These people have a dream, and their dream is not going to be realized unless somehow the perception of these people, the false perception of these people, is changed. That's why I'm doing this.
His goal moving forward is to educate and inform.
Most Americans, I found out, are good people, but they don't understand the issue.
So he will keep walking and holding his sign for as long as he can.
I'll never stop walking until I'm physically unable to walk, and then I'll buy a wheelchair and I'll use my wheelchair.
Wow. I could have talked to him for hours.
Yeah.
I'm sure. He was fantastic.
And no matter where you stand on the issue, it's just nice to see him taking this approach and this forum to,
Yes.
you know?
It doesn't even matter what side of
Yeah.
the political spectrum you're on. Just the fact that he's doing this and
Yeah.
he's so passionate about it and he's so respectful about
Yeah.
it too.
Right.
You know, I asked him, do people ever give you a hard time, come up to you, argue with you?
Right.
And he said, I don't want to argue. I don't go to really high trafficked areas.
Right.
You know, I just kind of walk with my sign, and if somebody approaches me, I talk to them, and everybody's been pretty respectful.
Makes you think about it.
And he's been online a lot, right? It looked like he was on Facebook, so he's been using social media?
Yes, he's all about Facebook and Twitter. He said his Twitter followers went up by like 1,000 overnight after Chelsea Clinton tweeted about him. So he's reading all the messages and getting back to people as best as he can.
Good way to get his message out, for sure.
Yeah.
Nice story, Katie. Thank you so much.
Calling all everyday heroes, the movers and shakers, those taking first steps, giant leaps, or onto the biggest adventure of all. Calling all forces of nature, the kind-hearted, the light-hearted, the purple-hearted, the ones who dig deep every day. We are Yukon Health, where together we are stronger than apart, because together, anything is possible.
Bringing the flag football Super Bowl to Connecticut, an annual tradition in the town of Franklin that's gaining traction.
Now, each Super Bowl Sunday, you can find a replica field, replica Lombardi trophy, and this year, even an actual flyover. Watch this.
The field, the hardware, and the flyover. For the fourth year, the Walsh Football League's Super Bowl Sunday. Flag football in Franklin, fit for national champs.
I have 2 sons playing in the game. They've come for the last few years. It's become a tradition. We used to sit home and watch the Puppy Bowl, and now we come to the Walsh House to play Super Bowl.
The color guard provided by Logan